So the focus question is, how did the radical Republicans ensure African American rights and freedom? Okay, so yesterday we spent a lot of time with the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. These amendments were very good in theory. They're very good about helping out African Americans get some more equal rights, whether it's through citizenship, the right to vote, okay? And basically, the radical Republicans are a group to ensure that. Okay, so we have two terms here. We have the word radical, okay? What is another word for the word radical? What is another word for the word radical? Extreme. Yes, Maheen. Radical is another word for extreme, okay? And we have the word Republicans, okay? What would be a situation where, let me start with this. What is a Republican? Okay, you don't need to tell me what they do, but what is a Republican, or who was a Republican at the time? Who was a Republican at the time? Not a Federalist, could try. Okay, so a Republican is someone who's a part of the Republican Party. It's a political party. Okay, and who was the most famous Republican throughout the Civil War era? Not Jefferson. Remember, the Republicans started in 1856. Yes, Abraham Lincoln. Very good. So Abraham Lincoln was the most famous Republican. Republican Party did not come into play until 1856. So we're going to look at how the radical Republicans, the extreme Republicans, ensured African American rights and freedom. Okay, and we're going to establish a couple of things that happened. But I want to mention this. Okay, whenever I see the word radical, it usually is entailed. It's okay, Aura. It usually is entailed with something bad. So if you have a radical group, they're usually a not so good group. So when I was growing up, there was a big group called Radical Islam, okay, and that is sometimes, lead to terrorist organizations. Then you have sometimes radical white supremacist groups, okay, we know white supremacist groups aren't so good. So whenever the word radical gets thrown around, in my mind, I tend to think it's a bad thing. But in this case, the radical Republicans were a good group, okay? They weren't the nicest people, but they really were big about trying to help out African Americans in terms of equality, okay? So we know Lincoln gets assassinated, and we know Andrew Johnson, who we spent a little time talking about yesterday, comes in as president, and he's from the South, all right? He doesn't have the same values as a lot of the people in the notes. No, don't copy this down. So we're going to look at, you got plenty of slides today, you have a total of 3 slides today. We're going to look at something called the Black Codes, because when the 13th Amendment gets passed, the South is going to try and get creative to try and find ways around the 13th Amendment. So starting with this slide here, okay, I know it's a lot. There's a good amount of notes today. There's at least 3 slides. So start with this slide here. Copy now, it's in red. I'll give you a minute to do it. Okay, so let's look at the first thing, the first attempt by the South when they come back into the country to kind of disregard, okay, some of the new amendments that have come out. All right, so transitioning enslaved African Americans to freedom and citizenship was a huge difficulty early on, specifically in the South, because you have a couple things. You have a lot of Southerners coming back into the country who have to accept the 13th Amendment, at least in theory, but morally, they still don't believe a lot of African Americans, should be seen as their equals, so to speak. So let's start with this term loophole. Now, loophole is a term we'll use over the next couple of days, and it's a term we'll use a lot over the rest of the year. But when you have a loophole to something, you're basically trying to find a way around a rule or a law. So the good example I always like to give is my first year of teaching. I had a very typical rule in class. All teachers have it, right? Can't use your phone during class without permission. So I had a student my first year, a little bit of a wise guy, but basically I said, saw him with like an iPad out, which at the time we weren't using iPads, we were just taking notes. And I said to him, hey, no, his name was John. John, no phones in class. And he holds up the iPad. He goes, "This isn't a phone. This is an iPad. We are allowed to use iPads, right?" And he wasn't wrong, because my rules were no phones. I didn't say no iPads. But he also knows he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing, right? He's finding a loophole to the rule. Now, kids, especially 8th graders, are very good with this. Okay, they think you guys believe to be very smart, and a lot of you guys are. So when you find a situation that isn't correct, you like to call it out, whether it's an adult or a friend. You guys like exposing people for situations that aren't exactly correct. Okay, a lot of 8th graders do this. Okay, it's fine. Okay, but the South constantly tried to find loopholes to laws. So the 13th Amendment said, we'll just focus on the 13th Amendment, okay? 13th Amendment said, no one could be slavery. No slaves. Perfect. Easy. All right? But the South would find loopholes in a couple of different ways. One way is they passed individual black codes in the cities that made it a lot tougher for blacks to live their lives freely. Now, are they going to keep them as slaves? No, but you'll see how they make their lives harder, okay? So the black codes controlled the labor and work and the movement where the freedmen lived. Now, tomorrow we're going to learn something called the Jim Crow laws. The Jim Crow laws and the black codes are similar, and you will sometimes get them confused, but they are not the same thing. We'll learn about the differences tomorrow. But the black codes specifically do two things. It controls the type of work black people had in the South, and it controlled where they lived, okay? So let's start with this photo here, help wanted, white only. Now, this wasn't from 1866, right? This would be closer to like 1920, 1930, all right? But a lot of places in the South only allowed black people to do certain jobs, okay? And since they're only allowed to do certain jobs, all right, they were only able to make a certain amount of money. So we're talking very basic jobs black people were allowed to have in the cities, black in the South, working on the farms, butlers, servants. They're not going to be extreme, in high levels of positions at the time, okay, that make a lot of money. Very basic work. So you can only have certain jobs according to the black codes. It also controlled where they lived, okay? This is a black code from Opelousas, Louisiana. It says, no Negro freedman shall be allowed to rent or keep a house within the limits of the town under any circumstances. Imagine saying someone from Yemen is not allowed to live in New York City. Imagine saying someone of Italian descent is not allowed to live in Westchester County. Okay? It's bad. Okay? But the black codes were put in place. They basically said in Opelousas, Louisiana, could a black person pass through? Sure. Could they work in Opelousas, Louisiana? Yes. But they cannot live in Opelousas, Louisiana. Okay? So you can see right away when the South comes in, they're going to make life for black people harder. And we talk about this reconstruction or bringing our country back together. The South is making that tough to do when they pass laws like this. Now, not every place in the South had black codes, but places in Louisiana and Georgia maybe had more black codes than, let's say, Maryland would. All right, but these black codes were very big, and at least when the country comes back together, this was the first step the South takes to try and find ways around the 13th, 14th, and the 15th Amendment. Okay, now, this is going to get into our lesson with this group called the Radical Republicans. So I'll explain what the Radical Republicans were, but these are extreme people in government who kind of thought like Lincoln, but just to an extreme level. Okay, so we're going to have slide number 2 we're going to need to copy down, okay, which is going to be this. Now, I'm going to say this, with everyone here. I know there's probably, if there's 53 students here, I know probably about 15 to 20 of you are just sitting there and not copying the notes. Now, that is your prerogative. I can't force you to. Abigail, not quite. Not quite. All right. This is one step in kind of limiting African American freedoms, but this isn't really segregation so much just yet. All right. If you're not copying notes, you're making your life harder, maybe not even for the unit tests that come up, but for the Regents as the Regents comes on. Because when you want to study for the midterm, which is in late January, and you want to study for the Regents, which is in June, and you don't have notes to go back to, it's going to be very tough to find what you need to find. All right, so I encourage you to keep taking notes, to keep staying honest with that stuff. All right. Let's look at this again. Copy down what's in yellow. We're going to look at the radical Republicans and what's known as radical Reconstruction. Okay, so I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, so take a look at the fun fact first. Abraham Lincoln's political party was the Republican Party. Therefore, radical Republicans were like extreme Abraham Lincoln. So they're going to have a lot of similar thoughts to Lincoln, but doing it in a more extreme way. And there's some good with that, and there's some bad with that. Okay. So first off, radical Republicans were people in government. So I'm just going to list the type of people that they could be. They could be senators, as many of them were. They could be representatives in the House of Reps. Okay. I should probably say congressmen or women. That's probably better. But congressmen. I'm writing this in the chat. They could be governors, leaders of states, right? Or they could be people in the president's cabinet. So even though it says Congress, there are people in government, they're mostly in Congress, but they can be found in a lot of different places. A good example is the Secretary of State at the time. The person that took over for William Seward when he got injured was a guy by the name of Edwin Stanton. He was a radical Republican. Okay, so these were people in government, a part of the Republican Party that basically thought a lot like Lincoln. Now, Abraham Lincoln wanted to provide African Americans freedom and rights. Okay, so the radical Republicans are going to try and go through with that. So they did not like when the South came out with the black codes, because basically they see that as a slap in the face for winning the Civil War. Okay, they know what the South is doing, and they want to punish the South for trying to pass these laws. Okay, so they wanted slaves to become full citizens of the law as quick as possible. Now, remember, the 14th Amendment that makes African American citizenship takes about 2 years during Reconstruction to pass. So the radical Republicans were very big about that. They were trying to get that passed. Number two, they were very big at punishing the Southern people who were trying to find loopholes in the laws and mistreating the African Americans. So if there was a state like Opelousas, Louisiana, okay, the state that had the black codes, they would go in and punish that part of the city, okay, for passing a law like that. Okay, so if you were from the South, you very much disliked the radical Republicans. If you were a Southern Democrat, you very much disliked the radical Republicans. Okay, and basically the radical Republicans took over for Andrew Johnson. So even though Andrew Johnson is the president, the radical Republicans from 1865 to around 1870 or so were more in charge. Okay, yesterday you saw when you were doing the Freedmen's Bureau how the Congress overrode one of Johnson's vetoes. Okay, Johnson vetoed the Freedmen's Bureau. You guys saw that if you did the lesson yesterday. I know 15 people did not, but for the 45 that did, you would see that Congress overrode Johnson's veto. That basically means, ladies and gentlemen, that Congress had a lot of power, more than the president at this point, because the president vetoes something and the checks and balances, the Congress overrides it. Okay. So how do the radical Republicans ensure that the South is treating the African Americans well? Okay. They decide, and a little bit of a bold move, they want to put soldiers, and also if you want to put here, they favored putting and keeping soldiers. Okay, and I'm just going to add this here for you guys. Soldiers and hand-picked government leaders in the South. Okay, so just add that little bit there. Basically, they wanted to put soldiers to ensure that the African Americans were being treated well, and they wanted to make sure that the South were not placing laws that would hurt the African American group. Okay, so you see the radical Republicans were very big about doing this. So you literally see throughout the 1860s and early 1870s, soldiers are going to go and basically protect the rights of African Americans. And so many fantastic things will happen for African Americans in this country from around 1865 until around 1872, 1873, and then probably by like 1877, there's a real change in the way African Americans are treated. Okay? Here's the tough question. Why is there a change in the way African Americans are treated after 1876, after 1877? Well, that's a little bit of a tough question, but you should know senators, congressmen, governors, people in the cabinet, they have term limits. Okay, so as time goes on, the people that were radical Republicans, people like Thaddeus Stevens, Charles Sumner, okay, these are people that were radical Republicans, they get either voted out of office or they retire or they move on. Okay, so when a lot of the radical Republicans leave, that's where some of the more bad stuff starts to happen. Okay, some of you guys already know the Jim Crow laws, but we'll learn a lot of other things. Okay, so the next slide you're not going to copy. I just want you to listen really quickly, and then you have one final slide you're copying before we start the assignment, which you'll have about 20 minutes or so to do. Okay, okay. So go to this quick. Okay, so just to compare Abraham Lincoln's policy. Abraham Lincoln wanted to welcome back the South after the Civil War with open arms. We saw this with the policy of amnesty yesterday. Okay, the radical Republicans were fine with the South coming back, but they wanted to punish the South for the Civil War. A radical Republican may be more willing to jail a Robert E. Lee or a Jefferson Davis or a Confederate leader, where Lincoln didn't want to do that. Okay? Abraham Lincoln wanted to free the slaves and give citizenship to African Americans. Radical Republicans wanted to free the slaves and give them citizenship, but ensured this would happen by placing federal troops in the southern states to enforce the amendments and the laws. I mean, if you're walking in the hallway with your friend and you see no teachers and you don't see Mr. Martinez around, you might be more willing to misbehave or do the wrong thing in school, as opposed to if you saw Mr. Eli and Miss Roby and Mr. Martinez standing right in the hallway. Okay, having the authority and the presence of the military in the South made sure that the South was behaving and doing the right thing. Abraham Lincoln supported Andrew Johnson. Okay, radical Republicans hated Andrew Johnson. You will learn Andrew Johnson actually gets impeached a little bit later on, majorly in a large part because he didn't get along with the radical Republicans. So they do not get along at all. Okay, this is the last thing. Please copy down in yellow and green at the end here. Yes, Abigail, he's the first president to get impeached, but we'll talk about that more tomorrow. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. Yes. All right, so copy this down quick. Some weird names, scalawags and carpetbaggers. I know, it's kind of a weird thing, but we'll go over it. Okay. So basically, we have the radical Republicans. Those are people in government that are trying to keep an eye on the South. But if you're from the South or you're not from the South, most of the people that had to deal with the Reconstruction and radical Reconstruction were everyday people. Okay. So we have two types of people we want to focus in on. Okay. Let's start with a scalawag. So a scalawag was someone that was given a nickname. It was a very negative nickname given by someone from the South. So if you were a former plantation owner in the South and you saw someone that agreed with the radical Republican policy, you would call that person a scalawag. That is a Southerner who lived in the South who worked with the radical Republicans. Okay, and some people, Southerners, would call these people traitors. Okay, so these are people in the South who worked with the radical Republicans and were viewed as traitors by the South. They tried to enforce black equality. Okay, and these were people from the South. And the way I remember this is scalawags were from the South. They were already living there, and they kind of changed their whole policy on, the Confederacy and slavery after Reconstruction. The next group is the carpetbaggers. And the way I remember this is like these are people from the North that moved to the South. So it's like they picked up their carpet, they picked up their luggage, put it on their bag, and then they left to go to the South. Maybe a stupid way to remember it, but that's how I do. So these were Northerners who went to the South and became in the new state politics. So the people that were like appointed to work in the state legislatures or to work in the governance, work with the governors in the South, they would be known as a carpetbagger. All right. So if someone comes from the North to the South and starts getting involved in the Reconstruction politics, they were called a carpetbagger. That would be also another discriminatory name. All right. They tried to make sure all Southerners were not discriminated against the African Americans. So you not only have the soldiers being placed there, you don't only have the handpicked officials, you got scalawags and carpetbaggers working together to make sure the radical Republicans' policies get pushed through. All right. And both these groups decided to keep federal troops in the South from 1866 to 1877 to make sure the laws were enforced. Now, this 11-year time span was a good time for African Americans. Now, we're not writing this down, but I just want to mention African Americans' literacy is going to rise. There's going to be a ton of new African American people elected into government, some congressmen, okay, some people in the state legislature, something over like 1,000 black people were elected to government in this time span. Okay, new colleges were put out. Historically black college universities like Brown University or Howard University, they were put into place, okay, for the first time. So we have now African Americans going to college for the first time, and some new job opportunities for African Americans. So this part of Reconstruction, which is known as radical Reconstruction, was a good moment for African Americans. Okay, but it almost gets lost in history so much because of what happens after 1877, which is what we'll start to briefly touch upon it later on this week. Okay, but so far, so good. We got the new amendments. We have the country coming back together. Reconstruction's going well, at least from the Northerners and African American perspective early on. Okay, but things will change. Okay, things will change. I think you guys have already kind of known that things will change. Okay. So, are there any questions before we move to the assignment? Yeah, Milagros, I try and give some foreshadowing. It keeps people interested. At least I think it does. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe no one cares. All right, so take a look at your assignment today. All right, if you look at your assignment, okay, you will notice it's pretty straightforward. Now, usually when you get a reading, all of the questions are at the end, but we do it a little bit differently for this period. I don't know why, just change it up a little bit. What I do is I decide to give a reading and then give you a little picture or a little PowerPoint slide that you can see here, and then I give you a question. Okay, so question 1 will be for this paragraph. And then I give you another paragraph with another PowerPoint slide, and then you have another question. Okay? And you do this for all 6 questions. Okay, so each question, so question 3 will be for this paragraph, question 4 will be for this paragraph, every paragraph above is going to be for the answer. All right, I presume many of you will finish this early, which is fine. If you finish early, just make sure you're caught back on the work. Can you go back for a second, meaning the notes? Sure, give me 1 second, Liz Mel. So if you guys know what to do, you're just going to read and answer the questions. Please hit turn in when you're done. I think we had 15 people not do the double period assignment yesterday, which is kind of unacceptable. So if you're one of those 15 people, then when you're done with this, you should immediately go back to that and work on that. If you're done with yesterday's assignment and you're done with today's assignment, you could obviously leave a little bit early, but no one go until you're turned in and finish. All right, yeah, Liz Mel, here you go. All right, you guys can start. I'll be here if you have any questions.